Namaskar to all. A very warm good evening to everyone present here. I welcome all our viewers to our today's distinguished evening session. At the outset, let me welcome all the distinguished panelists who have joined us in our studio today. I welcome our distinguished speaker, Professor Aloka Parasher-Sen, Madam. Uh, Madam is currently Professor Emerita in Department of Sanskrit Studies, School of Humanities in University of Hyderabad. We have also been joined by Mrinalini ji, Coordinator, Heritage Society-Rajasthan Circle and faculty member of Adarsh Postgraduate College, Pilani, and Parveen Kumar ji, Coordinator of Heritage Society-Haryana Circle and Assistant Professor, uh, Chaudhary Devi Lal University. Thank you all for joining us in our today's evening session. I welcome you all to our evening session today. Today it's our 175th Virasat Talk weekly lecture series that is being organized by Heritage Society. This session is being organized by Intangible Cultural Heritage Department of Heritage Society. Uh, this weekly lecture series, popularly known as Virasat Talk, commenced 2 years ago and has witnessed a very huge success. Uh, we have uh, during this tragic pandemic which we are facing from last 2 years, that has already physically disconnected us to meet, uh, but has allowed us, these digital mediums have allowed us to stay connected through different online platforms. And so, in our today's evening session, will be live on our Facebook and YouTube channel of Heritage Society. I request all our viewers and followers to join our program as soon as possible. During the live program, you may post your comment, your feedback, your questions, your queries in the comment box during the live session to discuss with our distinguished speaker today. There is also a feedback form attached in the description of this uh, video. At the end of the session, I request participants to fill the feedback form so in order to receive participation certificate at the end of the session. Our title of today's evening session is Tangible and Intangible Heritage of Hyderabad. And to speak on this, we have been joined by Professor Aloka Parasher-Sen, Madam. I now request Mrinalini Bhardwaj ji, Heritage Society Rajasthan Circle, to kindly introduce our distinguished speaker and present a welcome address. Over to you, Mrinalini ji.
Mute, you're mute.
Good evening, all. I welcome our prestigious and eminent scholar, Professor Aloka Parasher-Sen, and all the committee members of Heritage Society. The topic of today's lecture is Tangible and Intangible Heritage around Hyderabad and local communities under the 175th Virasat Talk series. I'll take few minutes to speak about our distinguished speaker, Professor Sen. Professor Sen completed her education with a PhD from School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London in 1978. She has taught history at the School of Social Sciences, University of Hyderabad since 1979, and currently she is also a professor emerita in the Department of Sanskrit Studies, University of Hyderabad. Her major publications and area of expertise and interest lies in social history, namely early Indian attitudes towards foreigners, tribes, and excluded castes, and different aspects of the social, economic, cultural, and religious history and archaeology of Deccan as well. She has to her credit several academic assignments abroad, like DAD Fellow 1986 at the Sudassian Institute, University of Heidelberg. She is also a visiting professor and Fulbright scholar at the University of California, Berkeley in 1992, the first occupant of the rotating chair in Indian Studies 2007, University of Heidelberg, and also the first occupant of Saroj and Prem Singh chair in Classical Indian Polity and Society from 2008 till 2011 at the Department of History and Classics, University of Alberta, Canada. She is a recipient of Career Award in Social Sciences and Humanities for Young Scientists during 1989 to 91. Also been nominated for ICHR during 94 till 97 and was member of the National Commission Research Council for History of Science from 2000 till 2009, New Delhi. I would like to say a few words about Heritage Society as well. Heritage Society is diligently working towards protecting and promoting the rich cultural heritage, tangible and intangible heritage and culture of India through various platforms like organizing Virasat Talk series, organizing webinars, workshops, archaeological excursions, and taking part in archaeological excavation as well. I again welcome our distinguished speaker, Professor Sen, and all the viewers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrinalini ji. Now, without taking much time, I may now request Professor Alok Parasher-Sen, Madam ji, to kindly present on today's theme.
Thank you very much. Namaskar to everybody. Good evening to one and all. So let me begin by thanking all those who have made it possible for me to deliver this lecture. To Dr. Anantashutosh Dwivedi ji, Director General, and Azad ji, Gulshan Nanda, Director of the Heritage Society. And a special thanks, of course, to Dr. Mrinalini, who made it possible for me to get in touch with the society. I am really happy that I have been put in touch with the society, and I look forward to interactions with all of you in the future as well. I sincerely hope that I will live up to the expectations. So let us go straight ahead to explain to you how I'm going to proceed with this presentation. So, first of all, in part one, I will introduce you to the meaning of the word tangible and intangible heritage, and most importantly, its relationship with history. So, my emphasis is and has always been on trying to highlight our multicultural ethos. And I feel that this multicultural ethos draws on, as is indicated in the title, on the role of local communities, because the role of local communities is integral to the making of this ethos and its sustenance. So that's part one, a very brief introduction to what we are going to do today. The second part is, of course, to illustrate the above, whatever I say in the first part, with examples from the metropolitan city of Hyderabad and the settlements around it, because I do believe that a singular narrative going back only to the last 400 or 450 years of Hyderabad has to be questioned, because it is our more recent history of Hyderabad indicates that there were many long-term cultural features which actually make up the profile of a city like Hyderabad, and this cannot be ignored. So what I'll do in this part is that I will take up these illustrations and I'll accompany it by a kind of commentary or a kind of statements which I would like to emphasize for all the listeners. And finally, of course, is the conclusion where I emphasize on the importance of the intangible heritage, because I think that if we have to look at local, sub-regional, or regional histories, I mean, we cannot ignore the intangible. Of course, even for national identities, the intangible is important. And of course, if time permits, we can proceed ahead with some suggestions. So let me go straight ahead to explain what I really mean by heritage. Or so, based on the definitions that I've got from the UNESCO as well as the Government of India, Department of Art and Culture's websites, conventionally, heritage, both natural and cultural, has been understood only as that which is tangible. If, on the other hand, we define heritage as something inherited, then we need, in addition, to also account for what is today commonly understood as intangible heritage. This means the practices, representations, narratives, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith that communities recognize as being part of their cultural heritage. So it is rather well known that major religious monuments remain protected, as do burial grounds. However, the small shrines or the local festivals find it very difficult to survive. So it is for this reason that I propose to emphasize on some of the small and local shrines that I think need equal protection. Now, I had undertaken a project for around Hyderabad, actually around small settlements around Hyderabad, but the city of Hyderabad, as you know, has a very vivid and vibrant history. So, the sources that I used for this heritage conservation project were as follows. First and foremost, I tracked revenue maps because revenue maps in their totality tell you not only about, well, whatever revenue is charged by the powers that be, but it also tells you about landscapes like water bodies, and which are very important to note in an environment like the Deccan landscape. These issues are extremely important because no major large river flows through. Well, there is the Musi River, but I mean, it's not a large river like the Ganges or the Godavari and so on. And then, of course, the conventional sources are the various kinds of historical sources, which are written records, objects, buildings, monuments, and everything that emerges out of archaeological excavations. However, these historical sources tend to tell us much, give us much more data on major buildings in urban centers. But then, what about village records? What about land utilization patterns and all? So, for that, we have to look at objects that are or documents that are, sort of found maybe with local communities, the panchayats or the sarpanchas, and so on and so forth. And then the third, of course, is I call this literary memory, but actually, because you see, at the local level, it's very. I mean, we can say local literature, but often this local literature, that is folk songs, poetry, and all, this is all retained in memory. So there is a continuity of the heritage through the practices and through the memory of the people, and this is reflective of actually sometimes a very ancient past, because this memory is so important for the identity of the community or the region that people don't usually forget it. And of course, finally, what I called oral narratives, because I think that the both the tangible as well as the intangible heritage, oral narratives, by which I mean, cosmologies, oral histories, or I mean, you go on in the project we went recording the history that was told to us by elderly men and women, how they looked at the rulers that ruled in the area before, for the last 400, 500 years, and so on and so forth. So these oral narratives are actually those that we have constructed, we as in the historian has constructed, and this uses both historical as well as anthropological methods of data collection. So I won't go into too many details of all that we had collected, but I'll give a kind of an overview of what it entails in the second part. Now, about history and understanding heritage. Okay, so history is about change, but I think it is as much about continuity. It is also about interpretation, as all of you know, since unlike mathematics, it's not an axiomatic science. I mean, it's not 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. There can also be differing and contesting interpretations. And therefore, one needs to make history more inclusive for a start. It has obviously been understood to be mainly about great people, great persons, rulers, ministers, writers, intellectuals, and about monumental buildings, palaces, temples, stupas, tombs. But in my understanding of history and, of course, her story, it is also about ordinary people. It's about its villages and rural folk, and their tangible, intangible heritage. Often written historical evidence for such aspects of history is found in what I call fragments, because they are not part of the conventional sources. So when we are looking for these sources, you may find a small inscription, or you may find a small object, or you may find a series of objects which ultimately, if you pay serious attention to that, you'll come to know about communities that were involved in making those objects, and so on and so forth. So basically, to bring to light a rich heritage, we need to cross this boundary between us and them. In other words, we need to we need to move into a space where many more people's history we are able to write, of both men and women. Now, to understand this effort, I have for the project also, I divided heritage into three levels. Okay, so the most conventional, and which all of us do, is the level which is built and which is materially visible, and that is why we call it tangible. But the first level is actually the natural heritage level, and of course then there is the intangible heritage. So both natural as well as intangible is intrinsically related to defining the identity of a people. Okay, so let's take a look very briefly at all these three levels. So I will just reflect on these three levels with examples from the area of my research, that is the Deccan and Hyderabad. So speaking of level one of heritage, that is natural heritage, it is extremely important to identify the landscape that is still marked in and around Hyderabad. If you've ever taken a train from Delhi to Hyderabad, you will see that it is still marked by a huge Archean rock formations, which are the oldest that are available on the subcontinent. And despite their destruction, this landscape is still very different from other regions of the country. And sometimes this landscape for historical periods is a hurdle or is an impediment, but oftentimes these landscapes have been used, or at least the rock formations have been used by communities in the past to to live in cohabitation with nature, or to use rocks for making forts, and so on and so forth. Since everything is not determined by rock formations, there are sub-regional identities that also emerge in a landscape, within a landscape, and that is defined by the emergence of water sources. So if there are natural lakes, if there are man-made tanks, wells. In fact, the region just north of Hyderabad, or what we call Telangana today, is actually a tank country. And so recently some efforts were made by scientists and economists with the help of the government to rejuvenate the ancient tanks, because it's a very interesting pattern of how tanks led to the formation. Provided for a very necessity commodity for agriculture and for the well-being of the people in this part, right? And therefore, some of this natural landscape has survived with a tenacity. And in the agricultural domain, this area, which I'm going to talk about, Hyderabad and the region around Hyderabad, and even generally, the dry areas of the Deccan, this is known for mixed farming. This was the norm, not an exception. Ragi country and millet country and so on. So there was a project was done by the Deccan Development Society, and this was to understand how the farming communities over here, because soil are very dry, they are red soils, they don't retain water and all. So they found that there was a deep historical knowledge of an incredible number of 20 odd variety of crops, and that the farmers actually protected the seed diversity. And this seed diversity is protected because, as P.V. Satish, who was a leader in this project, writes, and I quote, is a canon of what we today call agrobiodiversity, which many scientists now believe is critical to the survival of farming, unquote, everywhere, actually. So, you see, natural heritage is not just simply about the beautiful landscape and how trees are found or water is found and all. It is very embedded in the kind of lifestyles we choose, and also for the non-human beings that live in cohabitation with us. So if you destroy a particular landscape and the heritage of that landscape, you're also destroying yourself, and you're destroying the very basis which allows you to move ahead in society. The second level, of course, as I said, is familiar to all, is documenting the long-term historical environment. And here one doesn't have to do much, because the state, that is state governments, national governments, they are all involved in protecting the history of major settlements, so it's an Agra, or it is a Hastinapur, and so on, or a Nagarjun Konda or Amravati. So here you have monuments, sculptures, houses, other structures which are very significant in a region, which need protection. And of course, goes with that is the ingenuity of the people to make these structures. And we discuss all this in the major manuals on heritage, and also in the textbooks there's a fair amount of work that has been done on tangible heritage. Something that is slightly neglected is the material heritage, that is material cultures, which are known to us through excavations. Because what we usually do is that we put this material heritage into museums. So then we expect people to be moving into museums and looking at this, but there is no link with how this material culture was embedded in the lives of the people. So there is a little lacunae over there. And then, of course, there is the other major problem is that political upheavals did take place. So it is true that the great empires, Shatavahanas, Guptas, or Kakatiyas, or the Mughals, or whatever, they left behind major monuments. But what about periods of political upheaval? What happened to monuments? What happened to other things? So see, monuments in periods when there were no empires also existed, right? And some of these go into oblivion, or we sort of tend to want to sort of not know about them, because like they are not kept very well by the state departments of archaeology and so on and so forth, and so they're often neglected. So my concern is not to deny the rich monumental history of these periods, but at the same time to demarcate the larger processes of its cultural and social evolution, so that we can get an idea of the history of a larger number of people. So a very simple question I have posed, and I mean, one of my first PhD students looked at these building technologies, and then I told him, I said, behind the building, what is there? Who are the people who made these buildings, and what were the materials that were used? Where did they come from? Of course, more recently, such kind of work is being done in some areas. And then secondly, in this monumental or tangible heritages, we are totally not interested in looking at a fragment or a beautiful sculpture which is not linked to a larger monument, because we think that we can't talk much about it. And definitely we ignore the small remains around these big monuments, because I mean, they are not worth showcasing. And then finally, of course, is the intangible heritage, the third level. And this has to be necessarily done locally. So around Hyderabad, I do feel, in my personal understandings of the region, is where cultures meet. By culture, I mean, not just aesthetic cultures, but a way of life. So ways of life affecting all areas of activity, from social to technological, everything. So this has been a part of the subcontinent where cultures have met from time immemorial. And her intangible heritage is therefore embedded in the unique personality of different communities that came to inhabit these areas. And this part of the heritage, can only be studied if we bring in the question of oral histories that I was talking about earlier. Because, as I said, people who are not so powerful do not leave behind documents and so on and so forth. Or maybe perhaps one can refer to newspapers or public documents like this, but generally we don't have. So in the project that we undertook, we spoke to people and we asked them what they thought of the past. And you won't believe it, for them the past is not an alien land. That means it's like in the past. It is very much their present, because the past in their view is embedded in their cultural practices. So when they talk about charitamu or itihas or whatever, it is basically something that has come from the past but is very much important for them in the present. So their understanding of the past is not like how we as scientifically trained historians look at the past. And the past therefore for us is like this distant land, but for these people it is very much their present. So this gives you a totally different perspective on how you should look at heritage. And I think it is local schools and colleges, they should draw students into these, coming from various disciplinary backgrounds, including biology, chemistry, environmental studies, geography, etc., to really document these pieces of local heritage. Because I think, because the identity of a people is rooted in this kind of understanding. So now, before moving into the second part and giving you the illustrations of what we really are going to talk about today, I want to start. There was in Hyderabad, before the University of Hyderabad, where I taught for many years. There's a university, very well known university, called the Osmania University, and the head of the department there, Professor M. Radhakrishna Sharma, for many years was invested in studying the history of Telangana and Hyderabad. And I will begin by giving you a quote from his writings. I quote, he writes, it is customary to commence the history of Hyderabad with the establishment of the present city by Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah towards the end of the 16th century. This has the effect of making one feel that the area had not much historical significance in the early medieval and in the ancient times. Mention of some ancient vestiges in the area is not seriously taken to be part of the history of Hyderabad. The attention of reader has also to be drawn to the fact that the present city of Hyderabad, including Sikandrabad, and suburbs and satellite townships, is the result of a growth of over 400 years, and the city, when it started, covered a very small area. In the course of its growth, many hamlets and villages were integrated in it and urbanized. So, how true it is, because this is a process that is happening even today, right? So much of my project was about some of the rural settlements around today what we call high tech Hyderabad or Cyberabad. Sometimes it's called Cyberabad. There's Hyderabad, Sikandrabad, and now they say this high tech city is called Cyberabad. But basically, how did Cyberabad come into being? It came into being because it aggrandized the villages around this area, and their histories, or their intangible as well as tangible histories, have been sort of absorbed into this high tech Microsoft or Capgemini or Scient offices. And there is a very deep history that is embedded in the lifestyles of the people whose villages were taken away to make Cyberabad. So now I will move to the sharing of my screen with you, and I will go through a long history of Hyderabad and its environs. And as we move along, we will talk. I'll talk about it as well, right? Okay. So so let us begin with the first level of heritage, and that is landscapes or natural heritage. I just want Why I want to show you this slide is to argue that yes, of course, the old Archean rock formations, as I said, which are very very old, 250,000 million years ago, they cannot be replaced. Of course, they are being destroyed rampantly for development. But the important point that I want to make in this regard is that these rock formations helped societies to protect the water levels in this area. So if you destroy rocks, you're disturbing the you're disturbing the underground template of the region, and as a result, you're also destroying the water resources. And that is why many cities like Hyderabad and others that are dependent on underground water and not the perennial rivers, they are having severe shortages, so much so that Hyderabad city has to now get water from the Godavari and the Krishna and so on. So there is something about protecting natural heritage. And then there is the obvious reason why natural heritage has to be protected is because our earliest heritage, in this case, which you see on your screen, is a rock painting of the Mesolithic period, which was discovered in 1991. And there is a series over here on these rock surfaces. This is surveys done by the archaeology department people in a place called Panduvulu Gutta. And Panduvulu, of course, comes from Pandava. Okay, so apparently the Pandavas are supposed to have visited this place. And this is in Warangal district, in north of Hyderabad. So this is another very simple reason why embedded in some of these rock formations are rock shelters, and this takes you back to the heritage of very early times. So also Stone Age tools and rock paintings. For example, the image to my right, I don't know, is a painting, a close up of a red ochre colored painting, a bull from the west. But this is at a place called Mianpur, very just a district of Hyderabad, on just a locality of Hyderabad. But now this rock doesn't exist. It has been destroyed, obviously because of development activities. So it just goes to show that when we are documenting heritage, it's so important to document some of these small, not so monumental, but very critical to understanding the earliest habitations that human beings had with the areas that you're living in. And then similarly, rocks were used for the construction of burials, and this is a excavation that was done by our department in the University of Hyderabad. It is located inside the University of Hyderabad. It is a protected monument, but with so much of activity happening on the main road, and in fact there were a series of such burials, and they go back to what is called the megalithic period, at least 1000 BC or so. And within that, you find what the communities living in this area must have: pastoral economy or simple agricultural economy, what kind of pots they were using. And of course, in this burial, they also found weapons, a two-pronged weapon, a sword, and so on and so forth. So obviously, there was a kind of a chiefdom kind of a society. So such, if it is not protected, so what happens is that these kinds of monuments which were made out of rocks, then automatically they get destroyed because no property dealer is willing to preserve such small things. Now, historically, and this some of you may be familiar with, historically, Hyderabad is remembered as Charminar and Golconda Fort, 15th to 16th century. The history that we have, which is very familiar, which is very important, and it is also a history that is ingrained in the imagination of the local people, right? Because new rulers came to the Deccan and they established their monuments and their tombs. very famous now, the Aga Khan Foundation on my left are the famous Qutub Shahi tombs, which have been renovated and protected by the Aga Shah Foundation. And of course, Golconda remains a visual treat and also a physical space where people go to relive the historical past, so to speak. And the rulers and their histories. I mean, this is from the museum at the Qutub Shahi tombs, that they have portraits of all the Qutub Shahi rulers. This is Muhammad Quli Qutub Shah's portrait. And also, there are Dakkani paintings that tell you a lot about the visual lifestyle of people that lived in that era. Uh, uh, if you take a look at what we call the second level of heritage protection, that is the tangible, monumental, tangible heritage, then Hyderabad without Golconda seems to not exist. But actually, Golconda had its own history. Golconda was the original settlement of the Qutub Shahis, and they moved away from Golconda, like Kuli Qutub Shah moved away to build the new city of Hyderabad, right? So the Charminar represents actually a newer city from where originally these Qutub Shahi rulers ruled from. So there is a very rich historical past. The fort and the city that the fort around the fort is very different from what we know as the classic Charminar based history. Now, in the fort itself, there is a complexity. By what do I mean by complexity? Because if we are looking at Golconda as just merely a fort, then we will not understand complexity. And this is the problem with tangible heritage of monumental buildings, is that they look at a monument and they think everything in the monument is homogeneous. But that's not quite true, because within this complex that we call Golconda, you have, of course, the defense structures, and there are different types of defense structures because there were different gates to enter the city. Then there were one can go deeper into evaluating the building techniques, because if you look at these, if you enter Golconda, and if you any of you have visited Golconda, you will know that as soon as you enter under this arched door, there is a guide that will clap, and the sound of the clap goes right up to the top of the fort. So there are some things about the technology that went into the making of these arches and these spaces. And also about on the right hand side, it's very important. I talked about natural heritage. The early historical empires were very sensitive to the ecology. So here you have a 16th century, 15th century, 16th century fort where they have integrated the rocks into the building structure, right? And some attempts have been made by people in contemporary Hyderabad to also integrate the rocks, but these are very few inspired people who are concerned about rock protection. But by and large, people just destroy the rock and crush them. So here is an example of evaluating building techniques by integrating the natural heritage into our understanding. And then behind the facade, so you see Golconda from outside, but inside is actually a living area. So people are embedded in time. These are all, this is the, on the right hand side, my right hand side is the Rani Mahal, which is where they do the sound and light show. And then there are these various areas. There are pathways that lead into the interior. There are the washing areas, the dhobi areas. There are the cooking areas. There is, of course, the praying and the mosques and so on and so forth. So it's like a very large settlement with a complexity that even understanding monumental heritage, we tend to look at homogeneity and not look at differences that can be there in a given settlement. And last but not least, they also, while they were excavating, they also found some of these very small images of everyday use in the debris of the Golconda Fort. Now, why are these images important? Well, obviously, these are things that the people who lived in and around the Golconda Fort must have used. A prized possession, of course, is this Chinese porcelain plate pieces and some stucco pieces. Of course, stucco pieces would be for decorations. But of course, this, of course, talks about that they probably had very active trade with the Chinese or maybe with Iran, because the Chinese porcelain was already there in Turkey and Iran around this period. So from wherever, these are the kinds of small fragmentary pieces of information that have been found from the debris. But does anybody visiting this major tourist attraction in Hyderabad ever look at these? Probably not. They are lying in some old boxes as you enter the fort, and people rarely go to see these items or even talk about what were the lifestyles of these people. And then, ironically, there is a museum at Golconda called the KB Museum, and we find these kinds of objects or sculptures in large numbers. It goes into hundreds, actually. Now, what is it doing in the museum, which is, if you can see, there are some numbers, number 66, number 26. These still have to be identified, they still have to be recorded. So there is a huge amount of historical material, be that in the form of religious images, or as in the case over here of hero stones, saptamatrikas, various kinds of local deities, animal forms, and so on. And they go back to the 11th century or so. So immediately, if an archaeologist or a art historian wants to go deep into the history of in and around Hyderabad, in and around Golconda, there was a time and a place before Golconda, obviously, because these images and these kinds of sculptural artifacts will not be available unless there is a skilled community available, unless there is money available, unless there are patrons available, and so on and so forth. Now, there is a very, very long history of diversity in and around Hyderabad, and that is what I'm going to move into. And some of you are familiar. I'm sure Azadji is very familiar with the Buddhist heritage of what is Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, or the Deccan in general, Maharashtra. And this long history of diversity goes back to very famous places like Amravati and Nagarjun Konda, and of course these are world famous sites, right? So there's another issue of how and when how were these supported, who were the mainly the merchant and trading communities that were followers of Buddhism and all that. But generally we need to know about what was the social basis of it, and what was the kind of society around these places, right? Who were the people inhabiting, let's say, the agrarian hinterland around Amravati or around Nagarjun Konda and all. These are questions that are very central to understand the history of the region. A new place that has been relatively new is a place called Funigiri, which is like just 100 kilometers north of Hyderabad, called Funigiri, and this is also a Buddhist Vihara site. But this was till about 5 years ago or 10 years ago, people never knew that sculptures like this, as were found in Amravati or Nagarjun Kanda, have also been found just north of Hyderabad. So this is something of an ongoing process of identifying places, identifying the monument. And here we are talking about big monuments. We are not talking about small monuments. As you all know, a Buddhist Vihara is where the monks live. So this was a site on top of a granite hill, in the form of a kind of a naga shape, and the Buddhist monks had a very rich settlement on this hill. So what I'm trying to say is that over time, new settlements get discovered, and then we get to know more and more about the monumental heritage of a particular region. Similarly, if you come closer in time, you have the famous Warangal area, and this also has it's like not very far from Hyderabad, about 200 300 kilometers from Hyderabad. And here you have the fabled Ramappa temple, you have the Varangal Fort, you have various local and fantastic sculptural remains, of which you can see some over here. Unfortunately, because of the neglect of pre 400 years ago, there's a neglect. People are not really bothered about protecting some of these temples. This is a Kakatiyan Ramappa temple, which is in a dilapidated condition, and there is a reason why the it got dilapidated, because the Kakatiyas used what is called a sandbox technique, and the stones did not remain. This is a problem because of the nature of the soil conditions over here. But nonetheless, there is, just because it's not the Warangal Fort, it's not where I mean, of course, tourists do go to this area, but the point is, it is found in a state of neglect even in 2006, when we visited that area. Similarly, the Kakatiyan period is rich for the sluice gates that they built, for the tanks that they built. So this history of even monumental tangible heritage in and around Hyderabad is something that does not come to the limelight, because what comes to the limelight is what is in the capital city, that is in Hyderabad, and one doesn't even want to travel a bit interior to get to know about what a rich heritage of monumental buildings is there. Now, I am not going to focus too much. Now, I started with the monumental, but I want to go into not so monumental, but at the same time, things that talk about what we would call, let's say, ancient Hyderabad. But ancient Hyderabad doesn't exist in the today the metropolitan city of Hyderabad, but it is just a few kilometers away from the metropolitan city. So there is a place called Kondapur, where we have heritage that goes back to 2nd century BCE and up to 2nd century CE, 40 kilometers away from the city. Funigiri, I mentioned to you about 100 kilometers. Then there is another place called Kisaragutta, which is about 45 kilometers on the Sikandrabad side. And then just 20 kilometers is a place called Patna. And of course, the city buses, they run up till Kisaragutta and up till Patancheru and so on. So it's not as though they are really far, but the ancient and early medieval history of Hyderabad is embedded in these locations. And I'd like to share with you some visuals from these places which we documented. So as you can see, I mean, it's not a very finely made map, but it tells you about the fact that they are they're quite near Hyderabad, these settlements. And then there are some which are further away in Karimnagar district, but we are not going to be talking about them today. Uh, so Kondapur was excavated in 1942. It's a fantastic 80-hectare site on a mound that has revealed chaitya-like structures, beads, hoards, underground chambers, Lajjagori images, iron implements, and you name it. Very rich heritage of this place has been excavated. Some scholars try to call it a Buddhist site, but actually no image of the Buddha has been found here. But a lot of, like for example, furnaces on the right hand side, there are furnaces to make iron implements and so on. Iron crucibles are there. A lot of terracottas were found. And compared to any other city in India, 50,000 or 58,000 beads were found at this particular site. And Nagarjunkonda and places like that, even Taxila, some 700, 800 beads or so are found. But this was probably a manufacturing center for beads. So it was a very significant center just 40 kilometers away from Hyderabad. And then you had the excavation started in 1942, but they continued right up till 2009-11. And they found not only chaitya-shaped structures, but also circular shaped structures. And deep on the corners of these structures were deep pits with ash found there and with pottery found there, not being able to identify what these deep pits were about. So this is one of the settlements around Hyderabad, and these were the now there is a small museum that has been set up. So these are some of the pottery images, the Corlin image of a wonderful image of a woman with her jewelry, Roman coins which were used as amulets, and of course beads, as I said. And these small terracotta faces actually tell you about how women dressed, what was their headdress, what was their jewelry. And this is the kind of history we really need to document, because this is not part of a monument. It is part of the historical past, but it is very much part of the people that did different kinds of activities. So there were people who made coins, the people who made pottery, the people who made terracottas, there were people who made beads. And what did they do with that? There was an economic activity around all these things as well. And in the museum, as I said, in the Kondapur Museum, which has been set up by the Archaeological Survey of India, you find some of the material that has been excavated. But since this site is 40 kilometers away, people don't know much about where it is located. Hardly anybody visits this museum. And then this is the backside of some of those images, which are adorned with jewels, the hairstyles of that period. Sometimes I feel that much of what we try to adopt these days, as far as the long hanging earrings and the hairstyles, are very similar to what we find in these terracottas. And of course there are animal figurines as well, decorated animal figurines, very beautifully made, talks about the skills of the people who were making these terracottas. Then, of course, as I mentioned to you about Funigiri, this is like a huge vihara. This is a vihara of lots of monks probably lived over here, has been excavated by and as you can see on the my left hand side, that it was a major site and you can see the agrarian hinterland over there. So the monks chose this site because it was very close, it was on an important trade route, and they could go for their bhiksha, etc., in the surrounding villages. But that on top of a hill they made such structures is really commendable. And here on the hill again, you have viharas, chaityas, and of course something very important on my right hand side, water cisterns. So because water as I mentioned to you, water is very important. They used the rock surfaces, they dug up troughs in the rock surfaces so that in the monsoons, when the rain came, the water would get collected, and then they made steps to go down, so that on the hilltop itself water resources would be available. Now this is what I mean by saying that we need to move away from a major monumental building to looking at smaller such tangible heritage that is available to us around the major monumental structures. And I already showed you some Buddhist sculpture from where that this was when the site was being excavated. Very beautiful sculptural material emerges, but of course nobody has been able to study it very systematically, so it just lies. In fact, some of this was lying in the Sarpanch's house. And not very and of course here this is a birth of Siddharth, Maya's dream and the birth of Siddharth. Some of it has been taken by the State Department of Archaeology and Museums, and they have brought out an interim report. And this of course was again in the Sarpanch's house. As you can see, it has not been cleaned. And so these minor fragmentary pieces of information that exists in the middle of all these monumental structures, but are totally ignored in terms of heritage conservation. And for example, the image that you see in front of you now would be a fantastic study for anybody interested in looking at different kinds of animals that are depicted on these. Why are these animals found at the base of some of the viharas and so on? Would be an interesting study in itself. And of course stuccos and terracottas, again coins, weapons. a history into the metallurgical skills of the region, because as you know, in this area iron is found on the surface, and so therefore there are a lot of iron implements that have been found. And I'm, as I already mentioned, bead making techniques. So this itself, now that these are like not major monuments, but these are small fragmentary pieces of information. Each of them could produce interest in for study by any of us. Then we move on to a 4th century settlement. And when it was being excavated, the archaeologist who was excavating said that this would be the capital of a dynasty called the Vishnu Kundans. So I don't know whether you know that after the Shatavahanas and the Ikshwakus in this area, a dynasty called the Vishnu Kundans were ruling. Now, this is not so well known, but they had a major settlement just 45 kilometers away from what is today Hyderabad. Today, of course, a big, huge Shiva temple has been built, because Kisaragutta is actually a major site for Shaivite pilgrimage. And in 1980-81, it was excavated, and the excavators thought that a palace-like complex would be there. Today, of course, the site is, I mean, fully neglected. Nobody is interested in looking at what is happening to that big huge settlement that existed over there. But there is a small museum where the local people, of course, are very concerned, because of the fact that this is a Shaivite shrine, and Shaivism was a major religion in and around Hyderabad for many, many centuries. In fact, the earliest sculptural heritage of the Shaivites goes back to a place called Gurimalam in Andhra Pradesh, Shivalingam, with an image that comes out of the Shivalingam that is dated to the 2nd century AD. So this is Shaivite country. And so in the museum, Parvati, Bhairava, etc. is there. And also an image of Vishnu and Narasimha. But now, so what am I trying to suggest? That you have a major temple site, but around that temple site there is a very rich heritage of sculpture, as well as the religious history, as well as the craft history. And based on the inscriptions that were found over here, we are told that it was also a very important Jain site. So it's not just simply the Shaivites. As you know, all over South India, the Jains and the Shaivites came into conflict with each other. So this is something that we have to remember. And then last example where we did field work was a place called Patancheru. Patancheru is, like, as I said, 20 kilometers away. They excavated in an area which was made the Ikrisat. Ikrisat is a UNESCO kind of a project where they are developing the study of seeds and seeds in arid zones, and how agriculture should be done, a scientific study. When they were going about doing their task, they discovered that actually there was a major sun temple over here. There was a lot of historical heritage. There were local hero stones. There were Naganis. There were images of Bhairava. There were images of Buddha-like figures, all kinds of images. And some of these images, these people, that is the Ikrisat people, put in their office. So this image of Kuber, this Kuber-like image in the center, is actually put in their dining hall. You can see that there are food trays at the back. Then there are some which were put in their foyer. The Hanuman was found in a corner there. The very, very early image of Ganesha, which is an undecorated one, goes back to the Chalukyan Badami times. This was put under the tree. And then, of course, there's a very famous Nandi over there that was also put inside the office. So the heritage is disconnected from its original location and museumified, because we should thank Ikrisat, because they protected some of it rather than throwing it away and so on. But it just indicates how major settlements and its historical heritage gets museumified. Well, in this case, not even museumified, as decoration pieces in an in a scientific office that is looking into how good mixed ragi, millet, and maize and other such crops should be studied. And of course, on the campus at this place, there is a very old Vishnu temple. There are small shrines. One has to, of course, thank them for actually protecting these settlements. And local villagers come and still continue to worship many of these Naganis. There are many Naganis and ant hills on Naga Panchami day. The entire local community comes to worship these images. And at the entrance of the village is outside the ICRISAT campus. There are also historical remains, and we know from the inscriptions in Patancheru that it had at least 500 Jain basadis, that the rulers, the Chalukyas of Kalyani, the Chalukyas, Western Chalukyas that were ruling from here, not very far away. Chalukyas, of course, are a ruling family of Karnataka, but they're not very far away from Hyderabad. That it was a Jain complex. There were many Jain teachers that were living in this part of the country. So it's not just Buddhist heritage at Funigiri, Shaivite heritage at Kisaragutta. Here we can talk about a kind of a multi-religious ethos, but also the Jain heritage. And finally, of course, let me tell you about the immediate surroundings of the city of Hyderabad. That is the area where the University of Hyderabad is established, which I told you has become Cyberabad, right? So originally, what was this area? Originally, this area, all these places that I have listed, Gopan, Palli is a word that is used to describe a tribal hamlet. Konda, Mani Konda. Konda means like a hill. And then you have Guda, Nanakram Guda. Guda also is like a small settlement. Patan Cheru, I already talked to you. Chevaru means lake. So Patana means that this is a town near a lake, and so on and so forth. So these things, the earliest study that we could track down before 1964 was to get an old revenue map of all these villages, but this particular one is from Nanakramguda, a place that is which is now the heart of high-tech Hyderabad. And of course, you can see it is written in Urdu, Farsi actually, and also Telugu. And it tells you about where the water bodies are, where the vegetation is, where the rocks are. It also tells you, of course, where the fields are. Now, this map enables us then to identify places. That same map is used, and a new map is made to identify where the major water bodies are, where the major clusters of trees are, where the major temples or shrines, etc., are. And this is all done through field work, right? So here is where we are moving away from, well, the major monuments and then the not so major monuments and the fragmentary sculptures into very small entities. And some of these small entities are documented over here in terms of the lifestyle of the people that still continue to live in these villages, right? So what are their activities? For example, many of the women and many of the men and women both on the left hand of the screen, they are very deeply attached to what is called the Bonalu. The Bonalu is a kind of a festival which is very particularly local festival over here, and that is something that is very important to the identity of the people in this area. Similarly, there are very small roadside shrines. There are dargahs which are famous and which local people inhabit. People have used rocks to build their houses, thereby protecting the rock. They have built wells, which are very central to conducting any agricultural. Now, these are in the villages around the city of Hyderabad. And of course, toddy trees were at one point in time covering this landscape around Hyderabad, and that was a very important profession around this part. And then people earning their livelihoods in this part. So a lot of activity, a lot of terracottas that you saw is actually that even today the potters, the kumaras, the potters, and the pottery wheel that they use is still available, is still visible. The If you come to the main road, you will see a high trek street with huge trees and flowers and all. And then you go to the back lane, you will see a very narrow gully with people still living in these houses and carrying on normal activities that probably their fathers, grandfathers also continued to do. We also documented games that the old people in the village played. We recorded the history of the marginalized communities and what their lives are now, and how their ancestors uh, how their ancestors had lived. And we took photographs of very interesting over here that we are talking about local communities, but this lodhas over here, actually 50% of this village at Nanakram Guda is of lodhas. And these lodhas are actually people who came here from UP, Uttar Pradesh. And they came here because the Nizam of Hyderabad brought them to as guards. But now, of course, no longer are they guards, but they make Ganesha murtis and they do other kinds of activities. But rather than them being local Telugu speaking people, they of course speak Telugu now, but they are actually Lodhas, a community that came from Uttar Pradesh. And then of course there are the potters. Then there are the people who were the servile impure caste, the Madigas and others, whose histories I documented because they were involved in making the leather tubes to carry the water. They had to clean the village. They also had to bring wood from the surrounding areas for the farming as well as the non-farming communities. And then there were the Chakalis, who were the dhobis and all. And the thing is that these people's histories are very rich, because they tell us about how not only their religious shrines but their everyday activities, how their everyday activities were surrounded by different kind. They lived in close proximity to each other, and they respected, of course, the identity of each one. And therefore this very one small village had shrines which were Shaivite, Vaishnavite. There were dargahs, there were small local cults. And of course, you see on the right over here all these flowers that are distributed. This is another very very important local festival called Batukamma, which has now become the national symbol of the state of Telangana, so to speak, because these are flowers that are collected by women, and then they are made into Batukammas, goddesses actually, and then they are put into the lake. And also this talks about what the local ecology was, where natural wildflowers were collected, people made them into goddesses, and then put them back into the water after a few days. And this is the Bonalu festival that we recorded, where this is a fertility thing, and this is like throughout the month of July, all over Hyderabad, including the old city of Charminar, Sikandra, everywhere. Bonalu is something that is very endemic. So recording this festival and what it entails was one of the this is all that I'm telling you now is like really moving us into what we call the intangible heritage. And these are, as I said, women making the bonalus, and it's a community activity. And I'm not saying that everybody of all members of all communities sit together and do it. Of course it is defined by community and identity, who makes what, how they make it, etc., where do they take it, who takes it, how does the community, how a village community would be in pre-modern times. Those kinds of identities still remain. It's not, I'm not trying to argue that this was like this harmonious coexisting kind of a society. No, there were differences, there were hierarchies, there were a lot of problems also. But what is important is that such kind of activities hark back to creating a kind of a local flavor to the intangible heritage of the region. And this is just a sample I have placed before you of how we did the interviews. We went to a particular person, we took his age, we asked him about the village history, about the Shiva temple, about the Sonabai temple in this case, and he told us about how it goes back 100 years. He also told us about a disease that had affected their village called Gatera, and then that how the residents belonged to different communities: Yadavas, Gaudas, Malas, Madigas, Lambadas, and Muslims. And then the original name, very interesting, the original name of the village was Ek Naam Masjid. Later on, it was changed to Masjid Banda. So it still remains Masjid Banda because this was probably a masjid that was on an important trade route between the outskirts of the city of Hyderabad and the main city of Hyderabad, that is the fort and the Charminar area. So this is a kind of oral history interview log that we prepared. And now I conclude by saying that we have to integrate natural heritage, built-in heritage, and the intangible heritage. Why? Because this natural heritage of rocks, for example, in this image, this is a image of a Parshvanath, a Jain figure with a five-hooded naga in a natural rock. Okay, in a place called Sanigaram in Karimnagar district. Now, destruction of that natural heritage will mean destruction of this built-in heritage. Now, why, of course, are the Jains building their Tirthankaras or their Parshvanaths on the rock? Is because they would travel right from one part of the region to another. And as you know, Buddhist monks and nuns would always inhabit areas far away from habitations for meditative purposes and other purposes, right? So therefore, there is a kind of now what happens to this rock? If this rock is destroyed, as is being done over here, again in a place in Karimnagar district only called Vilasagar, then you see that there will be no space at all for that small image that was, I mean, it's not that that image is being destroyed. I'm just trying to collate the two things. So it will it will get totally destroyed, and therefore there will be no memory of that heritage that will be left. In fact, as a kind of a footnote, I should tell you that north of Hyderabad there's a very, very famous Jain site called Kolonapaku, which we've also documented, but I have no pictures of that. And there now modern Jains are coming and investing and making it a major tourist site. So this is how the multiple identities of people are beginning to resurrect their heritage. But it should not be in the hands of only the communities that worship those areas, right? It should be a kind of a collective, inclusive kind of a project that should be done, taken up by not only people who are interested in heritage, but also by the state. And so this is the plight of a very famous fort before Golconda, that is the Warangal Fort. And you can see that it's playtime. So there is nobody to protect these monuments. The image is also broken. It's just it's just neglect. So therefore what happens is that this new generation is oblivious of its past, right? Now with this I will end showing these images and just sort of conclude with a few observations, if you want to put it like that, that really we are what I had tried to do is like 4 points, maybe if I can put it briefly, is that I had tried to say that for any region of the country we have to unearth a very diverse history, and this diverse history, does the public know about it, or does the public only know about a particular memory of the past, right? Okay, so I think that increasingly we are becoming bogged down to having a very unilinear, monolithic view of our heritage, and I think it's very important that we should have a memory of all the diverse histories that we have. So, for example, I gave you the example of Hyderabad. So, from medieval times onwards, we had there is a very rich Islamic heritage of the state, but then we also need to create a Shaivite, Vaishnavite, Buddhist, and Jain trail. If not for anything else, not simply for the adherents of these faiths, but also because this would be very important for the state to attract tourism, right? So you would be attracting tourism of both local and also international, because the Buddhist trail would have a lot of people from Japan, Korea, and others coming. Jainism, you could have a trail which would take you to all the Jain. So this is something that we are ignoring, and the state is ignoring because it is not in the interest of, well, maybe funding is a problem, and therefore we cannot go into the small and the minor shrines, and we are focusing only on the major. See, it's a very simple thing. What is more recent will survive. What is ancient will tend to disappear, right? I mean, it's a question of the vicissitudes of time. No, with time things get destroyed, right? With some time, some of the more recent buildings, of course, will survive, but they will also be destroyed if you don't protect them. And then, of course, there is this whole question about, I gave you the example of the museum near Golconda, which has a very rich heritage, but no serious attention is paid. And so, what do we want to do with museums? What do we want to do? We should make museums more interactive. We should involve communities in the making of these museums, and also in involving local people to visit these museums, and how local people visit sites, Qutub Minar or Golconda or whatever. They should also be visiting museums where they really need to know about a heritage which is much more, which has a long-term, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic, past, and therefore we should be talking about periods of cohabitation. We should be talking about periods of coexistence rather than separation. And so, in this presentation, I feel that this kind of work that we did for the project in Hyderabad can be done for any region of the country. And we can talk about the diversity and vibrancy of a historical evolution in India as a whole. But the only small suggestion is that we need to really understand the strong cultural foundation, because later periods, whatever happens in later periods, I think that later periods build on earlier periods, right? So for a younger generation to only be happy with seeing what they see today and not go into the past of what we see today, I think is doing disservice to our study of heritage. So surely we should learn about this, and the only way we can disseminate it to the children of the future generation is that if we teach them through digitally interactive means. Because as we were discussing before we started this presentation, if we use the digital medium, and if we record some of these things digitally and make it interactive digitally, then perhaps maybe a lot more people across communities and across regions will be able to appreciate and enjoy our heritage. So, thank you very much. I hope that we were able to share some, I was able to share some of the things that I worked on. And to some extent, I'm willing to take questions if time permits, because I already took a lot of time.
Thank you so much, madam, for such a wonderful and insightful discussion on the tangible and intangible heritage of Hyderabad, and how beautiful is the dynamic relationship between the natural, built, and intangible heritage. Looking more deeper into some foundational questions of conservation of heritage, and how different kind of activities they are destroying some of those heritage. So I open the floor for discussions and questions. I also request our participants, if they have their views or questions, they can put up in the comment box in order to connect with our distinguished speaker today. We are receiving few uh, comments, possibly not exactly questions, from some of our participants. There is Sagnik Saha who is writing. This is really a thought-provoking lecture that brings into focus not just the commonly known monuments, but leads us to the often overlooked, deep embedded historical traces around the landscape. And then he writes, this lecture also brings out quite beautifully the trope of entangled lives, memories, and forgetting with these landscape always on the move.
So everybody is just thanking.
Ma'am, I just want to clear one thing, if you allow me to add,
Yes, yes.
that you notice that in people residing near Patan still worship Nags and Naginis on Basant Panchami. So, what kind of religion they do practice in present times? Like
Yeah,
you told
see,
us that there are some Jain population also living there.
no,
So,
no. Historically, Patancheru was a Jain settlement because from inscriptions we know that there were at least 500 basatis there. But the contemporary population over there are like ordinary villagers. Much of the areas before the 15th century, before Vijayanagar times, was actually Shaivite country. Lots and lots of Shaivite temples are there in this area, but these people are normal followers of either Shaivism or Buddhism or whatever. But these are local shrines. These are people of every community. They go to these. There are ant hills. Even people from Karnataka who are living in Hyderabad will go to these shrines at Nag Panchami time. And it so happened that in that Ikrisat, campus, there were lots of stone images of the Nagas and Naginis also. So when you go to that campus, you will see that they make them wear saris around that time. And then, of course, they do the ant hill worship. Not very far away from where our university is, there is a very big, huge ant hill. So now people have made a temple on top of that ant hill. So from a small local shrine, it is becoming a major temple. Similarly, a very famous area in Hyderabad is called Jubilee Hills. So in Jubilee Hills, there was a small local Peddamma shrine. Today, that is a major Tirthasthana because the local MLA made a temple around that shrine. So the making of shrines into temples is a process that happens, and that is why Radhakrishna Sharma says that when there was the city of Hyderabad established 400 years ago, it was a very narrow, small city. But over 400-year period, you incorporated all these small things into making a much larger Hyderabad Sikandrabad. And what I ended by saying is, it's not only Hyderabad Sikandrabad. Now there is Cyberabad. It's like just in North India. I mean, the best example will be the study of Noida, the NCR region. Noida or Gurgaon, I mean, the very word Gurugram, Gurgaon, all this indicates of a space that was a rural space, right? And in the case of Noida, somebody has done an urban villager. They're calling it an urban villager. Well, there are lots of stories in that area around the Mahabharat, places associated with the Mahabharat. And now, of course, all that memory is being eradicated. But somebody has done a book on that. What is the name? Vasudevan, the urban villager. So it's also a local study like this, where the intangible heritage. So the communities are continuing to live in small village entities near these high-rise flats. No, so this is some kind of a challenge in the 22nd century, 21st century, 22nd century. That what do we mean by heritage? Right, if the heritage has got the major, even major monuments in major cities of India are being destroyed because they have to do roadways and this, that, and the other. So but people, of course, cannot be eradicated now. So people, in the minds of people, still there is the I mean, I have lots and lots of data on the, people who, when they were born 1953 or even before that, they tell us that what they used to do was they used to go to the hills to collect wood, and that one the young boy would get 75 paisa for a bundle of wood, and the mother would get 1 rupee. So with 1 rupee, 175 paisa, they would go and buy dal and chawal and little oil for their khana. So this was like what, just 70 years ago, no? So I mean, and in an area which today is high tech city, where you are talking in millions and millions of dollars, and there's foreign investment coming. So I mean, it's not a very long period. It's not like 1,000 years. So I'm trying to track this thing. And why are people persisting? My argument is that people are persisting with the Nagana Panchami things, or the local ceremonies, because that enables them to have an identity. नहीं तो आइडेंटिटी ही चले जाएगी ना.
That is true, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you, Shagnik, for your questions. How would you address the question of forgetting along with the memories and oral histories and the existing discourse? So that's absolutely right. But where is the forgetting happening? I just answered, Mrinalini, that the memory is very strong as far as the local community is concerned, because for them it is a question of their identity. The forgetting is happening by people who are really not bothered. They need that space for some massive project to come in, and therefore there is a conscious forgetting, right? And even if there is documentation, do you believe that the revenue maps were available to us before 2014, because in the former state of Andhra Pradesh, but now after that they have stopped giving us the revenue maps, because the revenue maps become very major, they become major entities, they become major, let's say, resources for the state to identify areas which they can then go and occupy and sort of sell land. And there's so many disputes going on about Waqf land being sold. And why the local memories need to be retained is because if the local memories are not retained, then the community as such will lose control over the little resources that it has, because they are being coerced to sell their lands and all also, no? So
Yes.
in the middle of, let's say, main streets in Hyderabad, there are these large processions of the Bathukama festival or the Bonalu festival, with the ancient, the possession, the person gets possessed and all the traffic has to stop. Why is this necessary? Well, this is necessary because it is the local identity that has to be protected. And the formation of the state of Telangana in here was part of this struggle, that we are different from Andhra Pradesh. We have the same language, but we are different. आप देख लीजिए, बिहार, झारखंड, छत्तीसगढ़, क्यों? Why? Vidarbha now. Why? So heritage is linked to all these political and social and cultural questions. We can't think we should sit in one museum or we should sit backseat and do heritage work, right? Heritage work has to be embedded in questions that we should ask, and wherever possible, we should try and make a more inclusive understanding of heritage. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? Yeah. So, thank you so much. तो any
Thank you so much.
आजाद जी, अगर कोई questions आए तो email से भेज दीजिए, because I think you all also have to wind up.
Thank you so much, madam, for your very wonderful and insightful discussion on this topic. We are slowly now moving towards the end of the session today. We had such a wonderful session evening today and we learned how closely, and there is a dynamic relationship between all these natural, built, and intangible heritage. And then there is a natural heritage, which is the madam, you very clearly saw displayed some very beautiful pictures, and we were going through some of the important heritage sites of Hyderabad through your eyes, and it was so pleasing to see all this. And then we also saw how some of these sites are being neglected and are also being destroyed intentionally. There is certain natural heritage sites such as there are early habitational rock paintings which are being destroyed because of the construction works that are going on, and then there are burials that are being destroyed because of the property dealers. But then Hyderabad has also more to offer. It is itself an amalgamation of several cultures, and then these cultures defines the past as well as the present of Hyderabad itself. And
Yes.
so we have this as you beautifully laid down, that past is not an alien land, but it is greatly embedded in their everyday culture because it's part of their memory and they're living this memory each and every day. And then
Yes.
we have built heritage, which in many ways neglected. And there is also what I notice, that possibly in last few decades or last 1 or 2 centuries, the most of the archaeological excavations in India has mostly have been monument centric approach. It has been focused with a monument centric approach, and so smaller sites and smaller artifacts has been neglected at a larger scale, which possibly needs to be reviewed again, and some more archaeological methods. So uh, possibly slowly will be coming up when we will be moving away from this monument centric approach. And so
Yes.
when we come across this built heritage, we have also museums which displays a large amount of artifacts being collected at different places. And then this museum also lays down a certain kind of conditioning over those artifacts, which in fact adds up a layer of silence over the material artifact, as it
Mm.
doesn't give an overview of the political and other historical processes that led to the evolution of those
Mm.
artifacts itself over a different period of time. So it was such a very wonderful session and lecture which we had today. And so, as a moderator of this session, I thank you again, once again, madam, for this very beautiful session. I thank
Thank you.
everyone.
Very,
And now,
very well
may I,
summarized. Thank you.
thank you, madam. And now, may I request Parveen Kumar ji uh, to kindly present vote of thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are audible.
Yes. Good evening and greeting to one and all. As a member of Organization Heritage Society, myself Parveen Kumar, faculty to the Devlal University, Sirsa, from the Haryana Circle. Thanks from the bottom of my heart to Honorable Dr. Anantashutosh Dwivedi, sir, Director General Heritage Society, who gave me the opportunity to vote of thanks on this important occasion. Let me first of all congratulate our honorable speaker, Professor Aloka Parasher-Sen, Department of Sanskrit Studies, School of Humanities, University of Hyderabad. Thank you, ma'am, for your incredible and informative talks on this evening for all audience. It was really a remarkable addition in our knowledge, and your way will surely pay the way of in-depth knowledge of the topic of the listeners. On the behalf of Heritage Society, I would like to express my vote of thanks to Intangible Cultural Heritage Society India and Sanant for supporting and conducting this national webinar. My sincere regards to Chairperson, General Secretary, Director of different departments of Heritage Society, Virasat and coordinators of different circle of Heritage Society. I extend my appreciation from the bottom of my heart to Ms. Mrinalini, Coordinator, Heritage Society, Rajasthan Circle Faculty, Adarsh PG College, Pilani, for welcoming our speaker who have made this episode a great, grand, successful event. Thank you, ma'am. A big thanks to our today's moderator, Mr. Azad Hind Gulshan Nadda, Director BHRI Heritage Society, for perfectly managing today's session. Thank you, sir. I like to thank the organizing committee of the Virasat Talk 175. Thank you very much to all the members of this committee and also to all the members of Heritage Society for their full-hearted commitment with regards to all our programs and activities. Finally, due regards to all our today's audience watching this session from different platforms of Heritage Society, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks to everyone for joining us the evening. Do keep in touch with the updates of Heritage Society. You can like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow our Facebook page, Twitter and Instagram handles for updates for the forthcoming academic session. Thank you all once again. Stay healthy, stay tuned. It's over to Azad sir.
Thank you, Praveenji. Thank you for presenting vote of thanks. At the end of this session, I request all our participants to kindly fill the feedback form to receive your participation certificate. The feedback form link is attached in the description of the video. So kindly fill the form before maximum by tomorrow evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.